Slipknot has been a band that since the latter portions of the 1990s have been a bit of a revolution in the heavy metal industry. Coming up with the other new metal bands such as Disturbed, Slipknot was a force that certainly seemed to take the country, especially America, but also the world by storm. Now here on this very channel, one of the very first videos that we did was a band review of this group that was less than flattering. However, as time has shifted, we've softened and looked at this band with a little bit more of a constructive nature, and even did a full discography whenever their most recent album, Point 5, The Gray Chapter, came out. But there are still a lot of people out there that hate Slipknot, and perhaps do so for very silly reasons. So here on 5 Reasons today, we look at 5 reasons why people hate Slipknot, and 1 reason why they love them. That last part is extremely important, and it does come near the end of this video, so please stick around. Even if you get infuriated by all of the different reasons people hate, know that there's at least that at the end of the tunnel. So let's take a look at number 5. Number 5 is that Slipknot is baby death metal, or they are an extremely mainstream band that's performing what some people call death metal. Especially in recent times, the whole phrase that death metal as a whole has changed and now is associated with different groups has really ruffled a lot of feathers. People who are fans of the old school variety of death metal, or even some of its newer counterparts, are definitely getting a bit upset over the fact that groups such as Slipknot and even Sleeping with Sirens and the like are being determined as death metal and said to be as such by some of the fan base, whether it be ironically or unironically. However, unlike some of the other bands that are getting that association, Slipknot has gathered this one ever since the start. It's been one where it's always seemed as though this is the Diet Coke or the Diet Pepsi to the legitimate Coke and Pepsi of death metal, such as Obituary, Morbid Angel, Cannibal Corpse, Deicide, etc. Whether or not you agree with this philosophy is definitely one that's sort of a yes or no idea. It's nowhere really in between. Nobody just says that, well, I like the band, but I can kind of see their point, even though maybe some people should. Slipknot is definitely a band that isn't aiming to be full all-out death metal. They're aiming to do something a little bit different, something that's really a little bit more, I guess, accessible, which kind of ties into that mainstream idea. But either way, to really consider them just to be flat-out death metal is kind of silly. Number 4, the masks. Now, you might think that this element of Slipknot would be sort of, cast aside as not all of that important. After all, bands such as Kiss used face paint. There's corpse paint in black metal bands. Masks don't seem like they would be all of that, bad. I mean, take a look at what Buckethead does, for example. But a lot of the hate here actually comes in the concept of parody. Yeah, Slipknot is kind of in the middle of 2 groups, one of which has done the mask philosophy before them, and one that did it after them. And the one that did it after them directly stated they did it because of the success of Slipknot. So, what's going on here? The reason for the hate is that Slipknot kind of copied the idea from Mushroomhead and reaped the rewards and the gains that Mushroomhead were starting to hopefully build with their brand of music. And then afterward, Mudvayne came along and adopted the mask idea for their earliest works before finally casting it aside and openly admitting it was a marketing scheme. So what happens then? It becomes, a conspiracy theory that Slipknot adopted this idea for the same reasons, as a simple marketing ploy, a way to be deemed as individual by comparison to the other groups out there in the heavy metal horizon. Whether or not this is true, well, I'm sure plenty of fans will be there to say that it's not, citing that in some documentary footage, the exact reason why the mask idea was adopted is explained. It's really one that's up to you whether or not you want to go out there and do the research. However, it is something where it's a pretty silly reason why people hate the group. It's something where they might not even listen to the music and just jump on this bandwagon. Bandwagoning is a big one with this one, and while it doesn't have its own real number on this list, just kind of understand that with a band that has Slipknot's popularity, bandwagoning is pretty well, it's something that happens a good bit. Consider bands such as Metallica as well as Avenged Sevenfold, and you'll also see a lot of that bandwagon philosophy. Even smaller groups or groups that aren't as big as that, such as Dream Theater, also gets this to happen to them as well. Brings us to number 3. Number 3 is that Joey and Corey and etc. is the best of all time. Now, Slipknot has 9 members, so there's a lot of people that you could easily talk about, Paul Gray being one of them, may he rest in peace. However, one of the largest reasons for hatred is the fact that many folks are turned off that fans believe that Joey Jordison or Corey Taylor is the best of all time, be it at either drums, Paul Gray with bass, whether it be Corey Taylor on vocals, whatever it is. It's something that turns a lot of people off, and I think it does this considering it's based around Slipknot as opposed to somebody that has been in the metal game for 30 to 40 years. It's almost like this old school versus new school philosophy, where some of these kids that grew up with bands such as Slipknot being their first heavy metal group are definitely showing perhaps a little bit of informative or uninformative bias, but also based around the fact that that is their first, and you kind of always remember that. You always have a bit of a boner for your first in some way, shape, or form. However, there are others that simply just take this too far, and it actually causes a lot of hatred from outsiders, or hatred even from those who are trying to get into the band. People that believe that Joey Jordison is the best drummer of all time may have a case that he's very, very good, but there are plenty of drummers out there that do boast talents and skill sets that are a bit above and beyond. And plus, you have to remember that Slipknot is a band that has multiple percussion players. So, wait a minute, something's wrong here. Whenever it comes to Corey Taylor and the vocals department, I have a feeling this has a lot to do with the dynamic nature of the range. The whole going from death and fury and blah 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 to clean vocals that invoke a lot of emotion, and that emotion is present. Even though some people claim that this is a band that is completely and totally emotionless. That could have been on the list, but it's not. So, again, it comes to the whole idea of who do you prefer, and this is one that has always sparked debates that preferences are wrong, even though by very definition, preference is just who you like, as opposed to who everybody else should like. And really, is there any such thing as a true universal preference? Hard to really say. Number 2, their association with nu metal. We spoke about this in the onset, that Slipknot kind of grew up during the nu metal boom, and Slipknot has of course been associated with these groups, not only because they came onto the radio and came to prominence at around the same time, ended up on many of the same festivals, sort of adopted themselves among that grouping and among that mold, as opposed to kind of going the other direction. They've been on shows such as Ozfest. They've had their own shows such as Knotfest. They've shared the stage, I believe, with Metallica and other groups. So, as time has worn on, this is kind of one that should have died, but it hasn't, because people do remember some elements of history, just not all elements of history. So this whole nu metal association has never ever died, and this is something that you will see whenever you see somebody who is distancing themselves from the whole nu metal bracket. If you see a listing of the bands that they dislike, it will be all bands, essentially, from this philosophy. Slipknot will be included, as well as side projects such as Stone Sour or the Murder Dolls. This may seem very closed-minded, mainly because it kind of is. Nu metal has a specific sound to it and a specific tone, and Slipknot is one that's kind of the heavier side of that. It's kind of the heavier set. It doesn't really quite fit in. It's close, but not really. But that brings us to number 1. But there's something that we have to say here first. Number 1 in this case is what the biggest reason why people hate Slipknot, but it is also the biggest reason why people love Slipknot. So this is one that actually, instead of just being individual to one side of this argument, is actually the argument on both sides. Something that we've not yet seen on this series, but I have a feeling we may see it again. But the number 1 reason is the music and the fan base, collectively. So let's take a look at both sides of this. Let's take a look at the music and the fan base on the love side. This is something where a whole generation was exposed to this music for the very first time, and it sort of changed their life. It sort of changed what they really got into, whether it be young individuals that were of teenage age whenever this came out, or those that were simply looking for something a little bit different prior to the booms of metalcore, deathcore, and things of that variety that happened in the 2000s here in America. This was something that came out in the latter 1990s and seemed a little bit different than what you heard through nu metal. It seemed like it had a little bit more of that aggressive philosophy that was sparked among old school death metal, or just old school metal in general. So there are really two groups of individuals that latched onto this. They formed a fan base, they formed a collective, and they defended the group to the death. And they really latched onto this music. They felt that it had a real voice that either spoke directly to them, either that, or gave them something to really look at and listen to, that gave them that individual feel. It felt like they were part of something bigger than just something else. It was very interesting to see how this band grew up, and overnight, seemingly, went from having very few t-shirts and very few people knowing their name to everybody knowing their name. Whenever you have a highly successful debut album, that tends to happen. But it's also has fueled the other side, the hatred side. That the music and the fan base is what causes the furious enragement that really populates a lot of online forums, as well as just speech throughout the nations. That this is music that it almost made a mockery of metal, as some people would think, which is just completely and totally false. It made a mockery of death metal, which is also false. And, this is a band that's just doing its own thing, and people just need to sort of shut up and understand that. And the idea of me defending Slipknot on that variety 5 years ago would have seemed absurd, but here we are in 2016. Time does seem to heal a lot of wounds. But also the fan base on this is seen as one of the bigger cancers of either the internet or the world, and I don't really understand this one. I'm going to just flat out say that. 5 years ago, 6 years ago, again, I would say perhaps I understand it a little bit more, but after having 5 years of experience in a music store, maggots are among some of the coolest people that I've talked to, if they are within a certain bracket of understanding about music. Younger ones, they're young. That's just how that is. That's just sort of how that philosophy goes. If you're young and you think that you're king shit and know everything, then you're going to defend things to the death very, very blindly. And that's where I think a lot of people see this. And that's, again, a byproduct of the digital age that we live in. We see a lot of these tryhards that are, defending bands that they love and really trying to give them a little bit of that. They feel that they're not getting the just due. They feel like they're not getting the respect that they deserve, considering many others are citing these groups from the 1980s, such as Iron Maiden or Judas Priest, perhaps other death metal groups such as Cannibal Corpse or Morbid Angel. It seems like they feel that Slipknot is just not being, even seen as qualifiable, that they just don't have what it takes, and it gives them that feeling of, why not? This is my favorite band. Why doesn't anybody else love it? And so it's caused the war, whether it be a war of age brackets, whether it be a war of just taste. It's one that seems a bit silly, but it is one that is extremely prevalent. And it's something that did not help over the fact that this has been a debate that has been going on since the band's inception, ever since they first dropped Slipknot, their self-titled debut. And as the band rose to the claim, the people that weren't on board also rose to the claim. Think of it this way. People who love Slipknot, people who hate Slipknot, like Democrats and Republicans, Hatfields and McCoys. These are folks that are bitter enemies. And these are folks that still to this day, although not quite with the same fervor, with the same ferocity, or perhaps with the same sheer amount of effort, still wage this war. It still goes on. And it may never end. I remember a long, long time ago, in closing, I remember listening to a song called Wait and Bleed by a band called Slipknot. And I remember I was making a mixtape for a very special individual in my life. I was going to send it to her, and I wrote descriptions for each and every song. And the description that I wrote for Wait and Bleed from Slipknot that I included was to watch out for this band. They have the opportunity to take the world by storm. I wrote that based around simple assumption. It seemed like it had something there that a lot of people were going to latch on to. I didn't actually think that I was going to be right, because it seemed like whenever I enjoyed something, especially as I was growing up, that it was something completely opposite that ended up getting the love, that ended up, really receiving the boost. But there it was, Slipknot, taking over the world, starting with their self-titled release, through Iowa, Volume 3, The Subliminal Verses, All Hope Is Gone, and most recently, with Point 5, The Great Chapter. This group is one that encourages conversation, it encourages debate, and of course, encourages a lot of scorn, as we've just exhibited. But it's a group that if you like them, if it's a group where you appreciate their music and love what they do, you shouldn't feel bad that a video like this is made more often than a video such as 5 Reasons People Love Slipknot. It's a little bit harder to actually speak about why people love a band. Most cases, it's simple arguments such as the music, it really speaks to them, the energy of the live shows, things that are very standard. Whenever it comes to hatred, it seems like the reasoning is a little bit more silly, a little more convoluted, and once again based around a lot of bandwagon culture. So that's the reason why you're going to see videos like this more often than videos spotlighting why a band is loved. Do you enjoy this band? Good. I'm glad that you do. Continue enjoying this group and continue supporting them. Because Slipknot is a band that heavy metal sort of did need, and still kind of does. It still maintains a little bit of relevance to the genre. And it's a genre that's getting more and more relevance by the day, don't get me wrong, but in that time frame, whenever nu metal was just starting to remind people of the power of heavy metal music, that's right, I said it. Slipknot was a band that also let a lot of people know that something even heavier lie right around the corner. Whether or not those folks decided to explore that is a completely different story. But if you love this band and you're relatively young, explore it. My name is coverkillernation. If you agree with this list, tell me in the comments below. If you disagree, let me know. What are some reasons that you think Slipknot is hated? What are some reasons that you think that Slipknot is loved? Also, we have a deal going on over the Patreon. We make it to $250. We're doing a 24 hours of Cover Killer Nation marathon in late April. And what's even better is that if we double down at $400, it's going to be a 4-day event. It's going to be absolutely crazy. There's a video in the description that describes what's going on with all of that in a little bit more detail. So I would encourage you guys to check that out. And if you're interested in becoming a patron, that link's down there as well. If you decide to do that, I'm very appreciative and thank you with all of my heart. Once again, I'm Cover Killer Nation, and I'll talk to each and every one of you next time. Take care.